All right, we'll start this section right now, and then we will, you can watch the recordings, and then we ask that if you are interested in this very important topic, please kindly join us here and ask your questions. We will start discussing on the climate-friendly innovations practices in Africa and how we can collectively act to build a very resilient agriculture. So over to you, our moderator.
My name is James Stapleton, and I'm the Senior Strategic Advisor for Advocacy at CGIAR. And I'm really, really happy to be here. We've got a great panel. We've also got two people who weren't able to join us due to unforeseen circumstances, but they're sending video messages, which is great. So maybe what I'd like to do is first is introduce the panel. I've got to my right, Dr. Martin Vergene from the African Development Bank. And Martin's a great friend of CGIAR. In fact, I think he started his career in CGIAR. So, you know, that mix of understanding research and understanding finance is crucial at this stage of where we are in climate conversations. I've also got Boaz Kezire, if I pronounce it correctly, Boaz. Boaz, you're the head of advocacy and policy and advocacy at AGRA, which is a crucial partner for CGIAR. We've got a great relationship with a lot of years of collaboration, and we really see you as one of the keys to scaling up some of our technologies. We've also got Dr. Shakuntala Tisal, but she's not here. I've just got a message saying she's rushing. And then we've got two colleagues who are going to be joining us with video messages, as I said. Before I introduce them, I'd like to give a bit of an overview. We're here today to talk about the Breakthrough Agenda, or more specifically, the agriculture chapter of the Breakthrough Agenda. The Breakthrough Agenda was launched by the UK government on the back of COP26. Last year, in 2022, there was a report by the World Resources Institute where they identified 7 technology areas. And this year, CGIAR is authoring the chapter, digging deeper, looking at recommendations, looking at pathways for uptake, identifying technologies and pathways for fertilizer, for digital, for crop breeding, alternative protein, agroecology, really looking at how that can be delivered. Kenya, I'm happy to say that the government of Kenya signed on to the Breakthrough Agenda this year. And we're really in spaces like this to encourage greater debate. In past conversations have spoken about Africa aligning to world agendas. I would like to see going forward as Africa shaping world agendas. The African continent is really what we see coming out of the African Climate Summit, the first time in 31 years that there's a summit, a strong declaration, really beginning to shape the agenda. So without further ado, I'd like to call on the technical staff if they could put on video number 1, which is the message from Rebecca Brooks of the UN High-Level Champions Office.
Yes, let's take our eyes to the screen and we watch this important video. Media, over to you, please.
Shakuntala.
Brooks, Food Systems Lead at the Climate Champions team. I'm really sorry I can't be with you in person today. Thanks so much for inviting me to this session. So for those of you who may not know, the Climate Champion team supports the COP High-Level Champions, currently Her Excellency Razan Al Mubarak of UAE and Dr. Mahmoud Mohadeen of Egypt, to represent the non-state actor community in the UNFCCC process. process. And we have been working with CGIAR to develop this chapter, this agriculture chapter, and I just want to outline how we see this as informing and complementing some of the work that we're doing. And I see this in two main ways. So firstly, the agriculture chapter really helps us to align around key technologies to scale up. So we at the Climate Champions team work with a range of non-state actors across farmers, financial institutions, businesses, philanthropies, cities, consumer organisations and others. And this chapter points to several actions that non-state actors can help governments to deliver, including reducing food loss and waste, scaling agroecological and regenerative agriculture practices that build on indigenous and local knowledge, increasing the use of digital services, etc. And critically, non-state actors can help to inform and push for the enabling conditions that we need to scale these technologies, such as changing financial incentives, having in place supportive policy, subsidies and regulations that enable a level playing field for healthy, sustainable foods, creating market incentives to sell these products and reforming trade. And secondly, we're working with the COP28 presidency team as part of the presidency's food systems and agriculture agenda to accelerate action and momentum on food systems. And the recommendations in this agriculture chapter are aligned to this, and we hope to see governments and non-state actors step up the ambition at COP28 and set the trajectory to COP30, where the food systems and nature agendas need to come together like we've not seen before. And finally, a few thoughts on how this chapter could be relevant to Africa, noting there are many others in the room better placed on this. But I think the three main recommendations in particular that could be relevant. One, the call for increased international collaboration on scaling climate finance, especially to support farmers on the ground in a just transition to scale farming approaches that increase food security and protect soil fertility and nature. Two, promoting the international sharing of knowledge and facilitating the faster uptake of proven technologies, and in particular South-South cooperation and knowledge transfer. This could include scaling digital services in agriculture to help agribusinesses to deliver locally produced organic fertiliser, provide more real-time and accurate weather and soil information, and ensure women and youth have good access to the internet and cellular services. And finally, thirdly, reforming trade and markets, including those in Africa and between Africa, for example, the Africa Free Continental Trade Agreement, and external markets to incentivise sustainable, healthy foods. So I'll stop there and hand back to the moderator. Have a brilliant rest of the session. Thanks so much.
That's great. It would have been great to have Rebecca here, but I'd like to say we've been working closely with the Champions Office, and I think there's a real opportunity for non-state actors to be able to mobilize around a declaration on food systems transformation for COP. And I think that would be great for our organizations to be able to work on. Unfortunately, one of our speakers who couldn't make it, it will be the second presentation. It's a little bit longer, but it's a presentation of the findings of the Breakthrough Agenda report. So I'd like to call on our technical team again to put on the second video.
Yes, media, please, can you help us put the presentations on? And yeah, we can all turn our eyes to the screen.
The second speaker is Dr. Aditi Mukherjee. She's the CGIAR Director for Climate Change, and she's also an author on the IPCC Climate.
Excellent.
It is my great pleasure to be speaking at this very important event at the AGRF today, and my regrets that I cannot be there in person. But I'm very appreciative of this opportunity to do this recording and interact with all of you virtually. My name is Dr. Aditi Mukherjee, and I am the Director of CGIAR's Climate Change Impact Area Platform. And relevant to this session, I'm also one of the lead authors for this year's Agriculture Breakthrough Report, which is going to be formally published in a week's time from now. In today's session, I'm going to present some of the major findings from the Breakthrough Report, and I have some 10 minutes to do so. So let me start first by sharing my screen here. And so what I'm going to present today is an overview of the 2023 Breakthrough Agenda's Agriculture Report finding, and with a focus on areas to drive food systems transformation. Um, we all know, and to set the scene very briefly, emissions are at their highest level in human history, and this is caused by human-caused greenhouse gas emissions. And agriculture actually contributes to 30% of the global emissions. Not here in Africa particularly, but this is true for the globally overall. And so agri-food sector is both a victim of climate change, but it's also where emissions come from. Within the agri-food systems emissions, there are part of it is from agricultural activities, land use change, as well as use of energy, industry, and waste. According to the latest released IPCC report, of which I was one of the coordinating lead authors and a part of the synthesis report team, what we know is that the report is very clear that unless there are immediate and deep emission reductions across all sectors, including agri-food systems, 1.5 degree is beyond our reach, and so much so that we may even reach the 2 degree level unless we are able to reduce emissions drastically. While this science is agreed upon, what makes it pretty complicated in our sector to reduce emissions is that studies are showing the stringent mitigation pathways that does not take into account things like livelihoods and food security actually can end up making farmers in our region, here in Africa or in South Asia, from where I come from, actually even more food insecure. And that is something that is not acceptable going forward. We cannot have people who are already very vulnerable, even more food insecure, because we also need to meet the climate goals. So what we have here is what I call as a catch-22 situation. We have to absolutely mitigate, reduce emissions from all sectors, including agriculture, but we cannot do so at the cost of people and lives and livelihoods. Therefore, what it means is that technological and policy breakthrough should lead to a just transition in agri-food system, and the just transition should actually work for the poor, marginalized, impoverished populations that we at the CGIR work with. We work with the farmers and the smallholder farmers and pastoralists in the global south. So this is absolutely central for us as an organization, and also absolutely essential for the breakthrough agenda. Now, in this report, what we have done, and we would, if you have not already heard from, we would hear from FCDO, and we have already heard from Rebecca Sharp. She is one of the steering committee members of this chapter, is about the process of what this breakthrough is and how it came about, etc. So I'm going to focus now on, in this chapter, we propose 4 principles. Actually, we modify those 4 principles, and so 5 pathways for agricultural breakthrough. That is kind of our conceptual layout in this chapter. 4 principles of agricultural breakthrough. First is that for a technology or an approach to be considered a breakthrough, that must lead to sustainable increases in agricultural productivity and income, and these increases have to be in the low and middle income context. So we are not saying that productivity and income have to increase where productivities are already very high. So this has to be contextualized for places where productivity and income from agriculture are low. Then other is that we have to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from food sector. We have to have the outcome needs to result in improved soil, water resources and natural ecosystems. And the final principle of the breakthrough is that all of these technologies should lead to improved adaptation and resilience. And you will see that some amount of trade-offs are inevitable, and this is where I think the collective wisdom comes in, and whose interest comes first also comes in. What's important here is to kind of keep in center the interest of the smallholder farmers, and to see that their livelihoods and food security are not compromised. So with these 4 principles that were also there in the previous year's chapters, which we have modified to have these kind of clarifications, we are proposing in this chapter 5 pathways for achieving this agricultural breakthrough. The first pathway is very important. I don't think we talk enough about it. It's very clear that climate change has happened, that excessive greenhouse gas emissions have happened not because of Africa. Africa has literally emitted only 4% of GHG, But the main issue has been very high and unsustainable consumption in the global north and in the high income country. So one pathway in agriculture has to be around reducing unsustainable consumption, where such consumption has harmful effects on health, climate and environment. So in that, some examples include, and high consumption is not only consumption in terms of what we eat, but also what we apply on the farm to grow our food. So the examples include reduced fertilizer use in areas, for example, India, US, China and Europe, all of them use high levels of chemical fertilizers, and often those are not as productive, and indeed leads to all kinds of other problems. So some of the solutions include reducing fertilizer use in those high consumption areas by improving nitrogen use efficiency. The second solution that we talk about is reduce unsustainable intake of ASF, as animal source foods, in high income countries context by partial replacement with alternative protein. So we have a chapter on fertilizer, we have a chapter on alternative protein. Then we have a chapter where we talk about reducing food waste, which also happens to be quite high, particularly in high income country, while food loss is quite high in low income countries. And then we advocate the use of digital services to enable all of those. What we do not look in this report, but this should certainly be a part of future reports, is around this imperative to promote sustainable, healthy diets with low carbon footprint. This needs to be also at the heart of the transformative pathway. The second pathway is around increasing production of sustainable, healthy, nutritious food, particularly in these kind of low and middle income countries, without expanding agriculture into new lands. I think this is very important because we know deforestation is a major source of emission in our sector. And here some of the examples again are around fertilizers, increased production, particularly in areas in Africa fertilizer use is low. So this is where increase and optimal use of fertilizers and low emission fertilizers can actually help in increasing food production without having to open up new areas for cultivation. The other solutions are around increasing production through crop breeding, which we talk about, improved production through climate smart livestock practices, as well as agroecological and other sustainable approaches, and use of digital services. The third pathway we talk about is around reduced damage to natural resources such as soil and diversity. Again, we have examples from fertilizers, agroecological approaches, even reducing overall food waste and loss has actually positive implications on all of those natural resources, because you're practically using less to grow, to actually not wasting what you're growing. The fourth pathway is around reducing emissions, and here I think is important. Our ultimate goal has to be absolute emission reduction. We have to all move towards a net zero, but right now there are certain technologies which are leading to absolute emission reductions, while there are certain which are leading to reduction in emission intensity. We have to be careful because sometimes you may reduce emission intensity of say livestock, but if you keep consuming more and more animal source protein food, particularly in places where the consumption is very high. To give you some example, animal source protein consumption is as high as 80 to 120 kilo in some high income countries, while it's as low as 10 kilo per capita per person in Africa. So reducing emission intensity is not enough. We have to reduce absolute emission intensity. Again, we have the similar examples from fertilizers does that. Efficient use of fertilizer can reduce emissions. Reducing food waste will reduce emissions. Using various technologies available to reduce enteric methane emissions will help in that. And our final pathway, which to me is at the heart of the climate justice angle, is prioritize the needs and interests of smallholder farmers. Here, digital services, our chapters show that have a huge role, and they've been actually playing important role in terms of climate advisory, index insurance, etc. And again, the role that crop and livestock breeding for smallholder farmers can play in their income is tremendous. In the context of Africa, we cannot underestimate how important livestock is for the livelihood of smallholder pastoralists. That's what so many of my colleagues tell me, that is absolutely the pathway to come out of poverty for young Africans and to move on to a higher trajectory of livelihoods. Similarly, the importance of agroecological approaches is something that cannot be overemphasized. How do we reduce use of external inputs such as fertilizers and use nature to produce more? And the one topic that we do not look into this year is around investing in social safety nets for smallholder producers, which we should do. Two of the other topics that are in these dotted lines are around improving agricultural water management, which is a pathway to reduce damage to natural resources, and reducing methane emissions from rice paddy are not covered, but something that should the next year's report should cover. I'm almost towards the end, and then this culminates in certain recommendations. So these are high-level recommendations. The chapter has more details around each one of those. So the first recommendation is around climate finance, where we are saying that more climate finance is required for deployment of technologies that are already science has generated evidence on their effectiveness. They include agroecology, reducing food loss and waste, reducing livestock methane emissions, etc. Then on the policies we talk about, we need to develop, test and develop and share learning and policy implementation from the various countries. Here on we have focused a lot on prioritizing the redirecting of policies and support for agriculture to a sustainable redirecting basically agricultural subsidies towards more sustainable practices. Metrics, indicators and standards. In this our recommendation is around governments should come together to work on common metrics, and this four pathway is one attempt at those metrics, but they need to be improved further. On R&D, similar recommendations around higher levels of investments in ag R&D and the very important role that the National Research Extension Services NARS plays in this. And the final recommendation is around private sector, particularly around international trade and markets in the private sector. So I'll just to give you one example on how we go through it. So there are these 7 technological areas we go through. This is fertilizers, alternative protein, food loss and waste, crop and livestock breeding, reducing emissions from livestock, agroecological and other sustainable approaches, and finally digital services. So each chapter gets a detailed understanding of what is the state of the science. So for example, we kind of lay out how fertilizer use has led to positive but as well as negative impacts in terms of climate and other pollution. And then we look at what is the state of science in terms of how can we reduce emissions from fertilizers. And our report shows that there are 2 groups of solutions here. One is we need to increase nitrogen use efficiency in cropland that accounts for 2/3 of the emissions, and there are at least 5 ways of doing so. Better precision fertilizer technologies, nitrification inhibitors, low emission fertilizers, biological nitrogen fixation and organic fertilizers. And then 1/3 of the emissions actually comes from the production of chemical fertilizers. So here there is also a scope of reducing emissions at the production stage by reducing energy and raw material related emissions. Example, green ammonia is an example. So this is how we cover each of the areas. So I cannot of course go into all of it for the interest of time, but I like to stop here and acknowledge all the authors, as well as our chapter steering committee, of which Rebecca is here, and gratefully acknowledge the funding support that we got from FCGO. Thank you again, and I'm looking forward to hearing more about the session and the deliberations.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. We ask you to please kindly prepare your questions, maybe from the presentation, and ask our panel speaker. So I will hand it over to you, and then we can go through
That's
the
great.
questions.
Thanks a lot. Longer than we want, so I want to just jump straight into the question. Martin, you're the Director of Agriculture and Agro-Industries in the World Bank. What we're seeing is, the African Development Bank, excuse me. What we're seeing is a very small amount of money, only 2% of all of the climate finance that comes in is going to smallholder farmers. How can we increase that to sort of channel it into these types of promising breakthrough technologies?
Thank you very much, James. And I think, as the last speaker said, we cannot put on hold the food security, the well-being and nutrition of smallholder farmers and the population that rely upon them for food because of climate change. Rather, we need to mitigate climate change. We need to ensure we don't increase greenhouse emissions, but at the same time, also increase productivity, increase production of smallholder farmers, because we all need to eat and we need to take care of the environment, but it cannot be one for the other. It has to be together. So coming to your point, there are three things I'd like to say about increasing green financing to smallholder farmers. The first thing is at the national level. The next thing is at the sectoral level, and the last thing is at the farmer level. Let me begin with the national level. We all know that Africa, even though we account for very little of greenhouse emissions, we suffer the most from from the impact of climate change. And we also account for very little of the green financing coming out of the COPs and the efforts to increase resources to address climate change. And it's only about, I think, about 4%, if I'm not wrong. And the reason why is because African countries lack the capacity to apply for these funds. We also lack the capacity to provide baseline data. These funds, to get them, you have to provide baseline data. We also lack the capacity, baseline data like meteorological data and things like that. We also lack the capacity to properly even use those funds, the capacity. So in that respect, if you're going to increase financing for smallholder farmers, you need to address all that at the national level. At the sectoral level, many people, even when you get the money, many people see agriculture as risky. Banks, see agriculture as something that you don't want to touch and things like that. So we have to look for a way to share risk with the banks, either through partial carry guarantees or forced loss mechanisms. We have to be able to assure the banks that indeed, if you lend to the sector, and then at the smallholder level, first and foremost, agriculture is a business. So you need to raise productivity so the farmers, when they get the money, can pay back. And this is very, very important. Farmers want to, invest in new technologies, and they either use their own money or friends and families, because going to the bank is often very difficult. Or sometimes they get credits, input credit from agro-dealers. But all that is complicated by the fact that the productivity is low, and then also they're not very visible. So you have to help them raise their productivity and help them become visible. That's why digital agriculture all over the world is becoming so popular, because it makes them visible. You can see their track record of what they have produced. You can see their track record also of what they have sold. So I believe we need to tackle it at the national, the sectoral, and also the farmer level. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Martin. Maybe I could pass over to Boaz. Boaz, you've been working a long time in scaling of innovations. Where do you see those critical bottlenecks in Africa, and beyond to the scaling of these innovations that we know that are proven innovations?
Thank you so much for having me. I think one of the immediate bottlenecks, and my friend has just talked about, number one is financing. Do we have an understanding of the nature and the type of financing required to scale up these technologies? And I don't want to sound like money is the binding constraint, but I think it's the type and the way you actually deploy those resources that can be able to allow and really create a lot of adoption and taking up some of these technologies. The second critical information is, and it's been said quite often and again, the lack of understanding and the nature of the type of data we talk about. Historically, we did not have any models and approaches that are able to measure the greenhouse gas emissions, for example. Even disaggregating these emissions between carbon dioxide, methane, which of these is more impactful, and therefore, the knowledge and the understanding of how do you deploy models and tools to be able to know that if I really deploy this type of technology, this is the amount of carbon dioxide I'm reducing in terms of emissions. And that complement what my friend Fagine has just said. Of course, Africa is not the biggest emitter. And we've been having in the recent arguments, and if you look at the kind of thinking that Africa is trying to put across, a lot of different production enhancing visions and strategies and models, including, for example, the Dakar 2 Compact Agenda. Africa is projecting to more than triple production productivity. And of course, you cannot triple production productivity without increasing the use of fertilizer, building from the presentation we just had. We cannot increase productivity without really using the best use of seeds and technologies that are best available today. Or you need to have the latest level of knowledge and extension, as well as use of data, to be able to get these levels. But I think, and this is some of the discussions that are happening today, that Africa is projecting to increase production productivity in a more sustainable way without repeating the mistakes that have been done by the past. What this presentation didn't give us was where are these big fertilizer emitters are coming from? What are the big emitters? And if you're talking about reducing fertilizer, for Africa, we are talking about the average use of fertilizer from 18 kilograms per hectare against the Abuja target of 50 kilograms per hectare. We're talking about other countries in the West and the North that have talked about reducing from 350 use of kilograms of fertilizer to 100. So we are not there, and that's what Fagena is saying. We cannot compromise changes to feed the people in the continent, but we have to be very careful. How do we optimize these technologies? And I will use an example. Optimize water use, increase irrigation. Of course, there are studies that are showing some of the investments in such areas may increase emissions, but you can actually do models that you increase irrigation, water use that can actually be used from for example, using ponds as well as using poultry, and then you are able to release it within big rice fields without using a lot of synthetic fertilizer, more than double yield, less use of fertilizer, optimize efficiency. So these technologies exist, and we're trying to project these ones on the continent to be able to say it is actually possible that you can change production, but also be able to be a less emitter in terms of managing the climate change, as well as not disturbing the global ozone layer and the global system.
Thanks a lot, boys. What I'd like to do now is I'm looking out to the audience to see if there are any questions from anybody that we can take. Try and make this a little bit more interactive. I've got plenty of questions for these people, but people, sometimes I don't think of the questions that you're thinking of.
That sounds very nice. I mean, that's the exciting part about this section. We don't just do panel discussions. We allow everybody to ask questions, make contributions to some of these discussions. So if you have questions or you would like to make some comments on the presentations or some of the comments from speaker, please just signify. I will give you the mic. Thank you, Robin.
Thanks, John, and thank you to such an eminent panel. Boaz was talking about the leap to a next generation of solutions and not repeating mistakes of the past. We saw South America deploy no-tillage technologies, et cetera, in the 1990s, sort of leapfrogging ahead to things that were still evolving in other places. What do you think is the breakthrough that Africa can leap to next that will allow that next generation, sort of like cell phones, right? You never had to hardwire phones in all your rural areas because you just went directly to cell. In Africa, how do you do the same thing in Africa in agriculture?
Thank you. This is directed to all of our panel. In case you'd like to start, so I will allow you to start, and then I'll pick another question from the audience.
I think, Robin, that's a fundamental question, and many people, whenever we're talking about, we want to enhance production productivity in one of the major staples to reduce importation and increase regional trade. Some of the critics say, how are you so careful that you are not going to disrupt the already disrupted environment? What are some of those innovations and approaches that you need to? We are in a different part of the world. Use of technology, understanding the use of data and be able to make sure that we are deploying approaches that can able to be minimized. In the previous past, most of the utilization of fertilizer, and I could hear it in the presentation here, when you're trying to really look at the way the landscape are formed and fertilizer is used and therefore there is runoff, the amount of fertilizer that is lost because of lack of practices that are able to protect those particular soils and use less can actually be mitigated. That has happened in the past, but today we are now beginning to see countries actually being able to say we can actually be able to use easier and better means of fertilizer application combined with more hybrid seed technologies get more yields compared to just blanket use of fertilizer. Today we are talking about specific blended fertilizer products that are very efficient in terms of soil use, that are also based on different geographies and ecologies, commodity specific as opposed to blanket use. So these are some of the technologies that we can begin to deploy and be more efficient in the fertilizer use, but also increase production productivity, while consistently measuring and understanding the amount of emissions that you are actually either reducing or increasing, because only then you can be cautious on how do you need to deploy more. And I think these models are there. Of course, we learn by mistakes, but I think we're going to get there.
I'll just add to what was said, three things. One is climate adapted crop varieties. And we've seen how heat tolerant wheat varieties have expanded production of wheat in the lowlands of Ethiopia. You know, we are looking at 5,000 hectares that was started in 2018. It's over 1 million hectares today, and it's all lowland, getting 3-4 tons of wheat, you know, per hectare. This was impossible, you know, 5 years ago. It was impossible. That's one thing. The other is the drought-tolerant maize varieties. Again, it has been developed and it's been tested by farmers. It's found that when you have those short dry seasons during this, during the crop cycle, you can still maintain your yield at 4 or 5 tons. This is extremely important. The second thing is, like you mentioned, judicious use of fertilizer. We've seen the deep placement urea in rice that actually helps farmers to reduce the amount of fertilizer used. And this is very, very important. And the last is just cultural practices. We've seen the dry and wet cycle of rice production that actually reduces methane, you know, production. So there are indeed some very interesting technologies that can boost productivity, at the same time mitigate or adapt to climate change.
All right. Do we have any more questions before I take it back? Okay, excellent.
Yeah, thank you very much to the panel, and it was a good presentation. I came in the middle. One of the problems we are having is the youth. And when we compound that with the effect of climate change on agriculture, and then lay another layer of access to technologies that could incentivize the youth to come to agriculture, the problem becomes very, very difficult. And for some of us who are now charged to ensure that our countries attain food self-sufficiency by 2030, it's a great challenge. And I'm also aware that the CGIAR has developed several technologies, but the biggest problem is the investments required by national governments to access these climate smart technologies that are good enough, sexy enough for the youth to acquire. This for us is a paradox. I mean, you, the eminent scientists and leaders, what do you think we have to do? Because the technologies are there, but we don't have the financial resources to bring those technologies to our farmers. I know the example Dr. Fregene is talking about in Ethiopia. It required a lot of investment, both from government and development partners. So the question asked earlier on by another person in the group is the access to finance for us to have these technologies deep down to our farmers. What can we do? What is required from us? Before now, people say government commitment. We are committed. They say make the environment for investment. We have opened markets, but yet still we are not getting the investors to come to Africa to invest in agriculture. It's a paradox. So I would like to hear from you what lessons you can share with us on this topic. Thank you.
Excellent questions. Dr. Martin is going to put you on the spotlight, which you also. Who wants to start? Oh, excellent.
I'm not sure I wanted to start, but let me just give my attempt to this very hard question. We are part of the debate, and I think you used the key words, the youth, the challenge of access to finance. you probably didn't mention the challenge of access to land. And I think as institutions, individuals, governments, they are putting their heads together. They have already put their heads together. In the way policies were designed and implemented is required to be differently done today as opposed to before. Because the policies by government and others who are involved are blanket policies. We will increase access to agricultural finance. But they are not uniquely tailored to peculiarities and uniqueness of different needs of different groups, women and young people, because not everybody can just go into the bank, if you're talking about microfinance, and access money. And I'll speak from the context where I work as an organization, AGRA. Effective partnerships are going to be very, very critical. And I'm glad to be even seated here with the African Development Bank, because these are institutions that can afford to invest in hard, large infrastructure that not everybody is willing to put resources into. The WHEAT program is talking about the large-scale irrigation. All those investments are not low-cost investments. It's not easy. Government themselves alone may not easily allocate the billions of dollars required to do that. So I think the partnerships that are required in terms of those who are scaling up technologies, producing the CGIR, in terms of bringing the technology on the scale, the scaling up of those technologies with institutions that are working in that space, but the institutions that are able to really put in a lot of resources at a large scale to be able to create that investment is very critical. I think in the past, every organization, every partner have tried to do their work based on their own need without the required partnership that can bring everything together. I think we have an opportunity today really to partner intentionally, and I'm glad that is happening. Leaders are speaking to each other. Governments are more bored. If you listen to the ministers discussing yesterday, they were no longer lamenting. You know, when I worked at the African Union, one of my biggest challenges was listening to leaders lament. Speaking like civil society. We need to. Whom are you speaking to? You are the ultimate decision maker at a platform where you should be making a decision. But today, the language, the tone has changed, and I think there is a sense of optimism. And I'll leave it at that.
I hope that answers your questions. I would like to pose the question from the audience right now and go back to our speaker, so that we all don't start lamenting like the government as well.
We have a very quiet speaker here to my left, Dr. Shakuntala Pilstad, who's the CGIOR Director for the Nutrition Platform, Nutrition, Food Security and Health. Shakuntala, what are you hearing here that, I don't know, you've been listening to the conversation. What's missing from your nutrition angle? What are you hearing that's not there?
Thank you so much, James, and thank you also. It's been very exciting to listen to my co-panelists. Can you hear me? Okay, good. Yes, we all know that agri-food systems have a close relation to climate. And we all know that there's a speed and an urgency which we must move. When I listen to the debate today and at other times, there are some points that I want to bring up, and especially in relation to the food and nutrition the broad agenda, and also with respect to Africa. When we've listened today, just this morning, the main focus has been on production systems, producing and the inputs for production. We've said the title of this week, we have used the word food systems. So I do think we must move from just one little part of the food systems, which are the inputs to production and the production systems, to the entire holistic food systems. In so doing, we will be able to access multiple entry points for solutions and approaches. And these multiple entry points, some of them can work with greater urgency, with greater speed than just relying on the inputs to production. We've heard a lot this morning about fertilizers. We've heard a lot about staple crops. But if we would move to holistic food systems and use the different parts of the food systems for the entry points in which to find the solutions, I do think we would move further. That's my first point. My second point, and also especially with respect to Africa, I would very much like to see a greater focus on women and on young women. And that also takes you back to the whole holistic food systems, because that brings in the other aspects of the food systems, not just the production, but also the supply chains where many women are actively engaged, and also with respect to consumption. We've talked about food loss and food waste as being a major pathway towards getting solutions. And if we would work together with women who are mainly centered around the supply chains and the consumption part of the food systems, then that opens up very strong pathways for which we can improve and for which we can get the solutions to combine agri-food systems together with finding the solutions for climate change. And in so doing, yes, we identify the pathways, we identify the approaches we should use. We hear a lot about finances, we hear a lot about investments, but these are particular for particular actors in the food systems. If we just say it broadly, increase investments, increase finances, then that's not going to give us the solutions that are specific for women. Because the investments, the finances, the loans, the regulations that are needed, that are specific for women to play a part in climate change is very different from that of men. So we must be more specific in finding the solutions and getting the approaches whereby we can target women and also target especially young women going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shakuntala, for bringing a very different perspective. I'd like to thank our speakers who have been here and given their time. It's a very tight week. I'd just like to say, I'd like to leave us with a couple of just two small points, and I think it picks up on what Shakuntala said. Going forward to COP, thinking of it in terms of the different regions of the world, not just Africa. Two things. One thing is we need to find a way to help banks understand the risk in the smallholder farming and food systems, and to be able to understand it and price it, because at the moment it's been excluded. A lot of tools are being developed, and I think we really need to bring banks, speaking of, it's not just the food systems, but even the whole way forward. The second one is, and how we can make sure that things like the Breakthrough Agenda are aligned to what's coming out of the Africa Climate Summit, are aligned to what came out of COP last year, and are aligned to what comes out of COP this year, because that policy coherence and inclusive policy coherence is really going to make it easier for us to do this, rather than having too many agendas which are not speaking to each other. So I'd like to thank everybody again, and I look forward to continuing the conversation.
Excellent. Can I please ask you to please kindly hold on for now? Because we have a bit of, I'm giving you a bit of flexibility of 10 more minutes or 5 more minutes so that we can wrap up the whole thing. But I would like to take a questions, or 1 or 2 questions or contributions for our food price laureate. If you have any questions, particularly on the point she made around women involvement and young women as well. If you have any questions, please let me know. If not, I will ask our wonderful speaker to please give us a punchline that we can take as takeaway. That's a very good summary, by the way. If we are going to take one punchline away, whether we want to tweet about it as well, I would like to hear from you. Punchline, and after that, I will welcome the audience to please join us on the stage afterward. We take a very good picture together, and then we can put on all our social media platforms. Thank you. Over to you.
Start.
Oh, we start. All right, we start from you.
There are many global agendas that we all have to take into account and we all have to be part of. My plea is let's be selective of the ones we think we can move faster with and with urgency. And the integration of climate, food and nutrition, food systems is important. So let's use that integration as we move forward now with this agenda and also moving forward to the agendas of COP. Thank you.
Excellent.
So I think if you look at the country level, there's so many very important partners. There's the government, there's the research and development community, there are the financial institutions, the banks, there are the NGOs. A lot of people doing a lot of good work, but somehow they need an intermediary to integrate all that in a way that we actually make progress. Otherwise, there's going to be a lot of disparate efforts, and there's not going to be one big direction of all those efforts. So I really think we need an intermediary. Like what happened in Ethiopia, you had the African Agricultural Transformation Agency. We definitely need that. And to Patrick's question, the government is willing to do that. They want to do the policy, but the other people are not on board. We need that. Yeah, thank you.
Excellent.
I think for me, my major takeaway message is that Africa is very ready to advance its food system transformation in a sustainable way. Africa is going to be one of the biggest solutions to mitigate climate change and adapt to the old agendas. It's ready. All is needed is to make sure that all the commitments that are made should be actually realized, and we are ready to be part of that agenda. Inclusively, bringing in women, youth, but also more important, and making sure that the nutrition agenda is part of the transformation journey. Without that, then you are not actually being nutritious enough, and the food system would move in the right direction. Thank
Excellent.
you.
Can you please help me give a very warm round of applause for our wonderful speakers? Thank you.